Hi, it's me, Kate Cook again, and we are today in another Resilience Thrive discussion, a chat with really interesting people so that we can inspire more resilience, not just during COVID-19 lockdown, but throughout and beyond. And today it's my huge pleasure to introduce a conversation with a lovely friend, colleague, mentor, coach, I don't know what else. It's the lovely Kate Benson. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Kay. It's lovely to be here.
So for those of you who don't know who Kate is, which I find very hard to believe, I can't imagine that's possible, Kate is the Society of NLP's International Director of Education, and is co-author with Richard Bandler of an amazing book, Teaching Excellence, and runs trainings in teaching excellence, NLP in education, and way much more. And we'll find out more about that later. But today I thought we would talk very much from our hearts about the next generation, something that we're both heavily invested in, whatever that means. But what's just as a sort of an opener, Kate, what's on your radar at the moment? We're in lockdown still. What's on your radar from parents, teachers, children? What's going on?
Well, don't we live in interesting times? I think I've been spending quite a lot of time talking to teachers. I'm talking to parents, and I think, you know, my little acronym at the moment is SOS. It's about strategies, it's about opportunities, and it's about focusing on your successes. As I talk to children, I think children are giving us a very interesting message. When I ask them, and I'm sure you do the same, Kay, with your little people, what do you really not like about COVID-19 and lockdown? By the way, I really hate the term lockdown.
I know, I do too.
I'm on retreat. That's the way I'm thinking about it. This is time for myself, I'm on retreat. I know a lot of people can't go on retreat. You might have a house full of kids, but find another word that describes for you what it is, because lockdown just feels so restrictive. So when I talk to the children, say, you know, well, you're staying at home, not going to school, what's the worst thing? What don't you like? They say, oh, I miss my friends. That's most of them, not all of them, most of them. And I say, what's been a good thing about it? And almost every single one has said, spending more time with my parents. So for me, that has been a really big thing, a big message to put out to parents to say, all right, you might be worried about how much learning they're doing, how much English or maths or science they're doing. You might be worried about how much structure they've got in the day, or whether they're online too much. But actually what they're enjoying is your time. And how lovely that is that they have that now. And I think those parents it's echoed from the parents as well in some ways. I think initially there was a sort of shock, oh my goodness, how do we do this? Right, I've got to spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with my children, which, let's face it, after they've been babies, most of us don't do that. You know, even if I remember when my son was little, he was about 18 months old, I went to do a craft course, 6-week craft course at the local adult education centre. And my only reason for doing it was because I got an hour and a half childcare. So it gave me an hour and a half to like be an adult and do something different and have a cup of coffee with somebody, you know, and a grown-up chat. So I think it was this initial huge shock for people. But once they if they manage to relax into it and to let the rhythm develop, then I think parents are also starting to relish the time and realize that this is time limited. It's not going to go on forever. So when I said in the SOS about opportunities, it's about relishing the opportunities, the differences, the time that you've got, to do something different with. So I think that, you know, with children and parents, those are things that are big messages and things that I'm noticing. I think in teachers, oh my goodness, take your hat off to them. I think that, well, the first thing that I want to say about teachers is an enormous range of practice. There are some teachers who just gone like, okay, we shouldn't, you know, hey ho. And then there are others that are working their socks off to provide lessons and classes and whatever. And I think parents, bless them, of course, lots of parents are a bit too conscientious about this. You know, I'm talking to parents who are thinking, oh, they're sending all this work and we can't possibly get through it. How do they do it? Well, they don't. They don't do it. They're giving you opportunities. They're giving you suggestions. They're going, well, maybe they'd like to do this, all that, not you have to do this and this and this and this. So I think that's been going on. And really, teachers are not worried about those parents who are worried. They're worried about the children who are not resourced. You know, we're in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And there are a lot of children who are not in a very good boat. You know, I was reading about children who are not getting the vouchers for their lunches. And some schools are, you know, saying that's more important than putting lessons online. Let's, you know, get packed lunches out to the kids. And there are others that haven't got access to the internet. They don't all have iPads or computers. So, you know, the idea of being online or spending too much time online isn't necessarily an issue. And, you know, yes, they will be stuck in front of the TV because that's what's available to them. So I think, you know, that my concern is for those children. And I think most teachers are not going to worry about how, you know, whether or not your child has kept up. I think what they're going to worry about is the ones that have been left behind and need help and support. So those are sort of the big things on my radar.
Yeah, that's absolutely, yeah, it echoes very much the sort of messages and conversations I'm having with parents, teachers and children. There's something in all of that, you know, when the children are telling us that they just really love and appreciate the time with their parents, there's something fundamental that we seem to have lost or ignored. I wonder, because you know, my big issue about teaching and learning is the kids are learning every second of every day. The question is, what are they learning? And if they're learning to get attention from their parents in unhelpful ways, then they're going to do that anyway. And so I really get what you're saying about this opportunity to tune into what your children need from you, which is nothing to do with the national curriculum.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've, you know, when I've been doing these big webinars and things recently, talking to parents and stuff, you know, my big question at the end, the question that I like to leave people with is what do you want your children to learn from this experience? You know, what is the big message? They won't remember, you know, people who've read my book will know that one of the things that I say all the time is that they won't necessarily remember what they learned, but they'll remember how they felt about it. So that connection to the feelings you have about learning something. So they'll remember their feelings at this time much more powerfully than whether they learn to do 12 quadratic equations or learn something about Outer Mongolia in geography. That isn't what's going to be the messages they take away. So, you know, my question to parents and to teachers to some extent is, you know, what do you want your children to take away from this? You know, what I'd like them to take away from it is, you know, a sense of more compassion, of being compassionate and kind. You know, the lovely things, as you say, the things that they're learning from that are going on around them, Even if they're a little bit, I don't know, I wonder about them, the questionable practices at times, I suppose. But, the fact that people are stepping out and stepping up and doing things differently. And, we've got ladies sewing scrubs and people delivering food and making food and all sorts of lovely things where people have said, we're in this together and let's do something. And those are the things that I think children can learn from. When I say questionable, I'm thinking we shouldn't really need to be doing this, but because we should have enough PPE for not just for our health service, but for our carers. And there's questions around that. That's what I make my questionable practice. But nevertheless, this is a situation we're in, and people are stepping up and taking care of each other and looking out for each other. And I think those are really great messages for children to have and to take away.
Capacity building, really, isn't it? It's the building a capacity for a more connected future where community or connection and collaboration and a different way of working together, rather than what I saw a lot of this time, which is parents complaining that their children wanted to be in their little square space with their screen and disconnected from anything other than that screen. And so there's this opportunity to reconnect to family, to community.
I think that's true, but I think the question that you have to go back to is that, so why were they doing that in the first place? A lot of parents are saying to me, then now they're spending even more screen time, but screen time in of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. So it's a neutral thing. It's neither good nor bad. It's what you're doing that's more important. And I think, the classic, teenage, somebody was saying, teenagers spend all this time in their rooms. Well, they do, they always have done, we did. It's not just a thing that happens when your brain's changing and your body's changing. That's where you want to be. You want to be making your connections with your friends. Now they do it through their phones. Before we did, way back, it was like, we had to all listen to Top of the Pops at a certain time and everybody be in their rooms with their radios doing that or whatever. There's always something that teenagers did that connected them together. And so when they become obsessive about that, what's happening, what I was seeing was that when they, those few moments when your teenager turns their attention away from their screen and looks towards the adults in the house, the parents, what were the parents doing? Well, the parents were doing this. So that moment is lost. That moment goes, and so the kid goes, and then they go back to it again. So now, because parents are paying attention to their children more, the children are paying more attention to them. It's like, that's the way it works. So, I don't make out that all teenagers are going to have, joyful relationships with their parents. They're not, because that's not the nature of being a teenager either, But it is an opportunity for them to, have conversations about things. I think there's also some lovely things that are happening as well, not just outside and being, kinder to others, but people are eating together. Where did that come from? Suddenly people are cooking and baking and eating together. And that's because you're not, running them to the ballet class or the football coaching or the extra maths tuition or the clarinet lesson or whatever it is. So there's this, and we have to make special times because there's no external input giving us special times. So it's interesting, isn't it? Thursday, 8 o'clock's a special time. Sitting down to a meal is a special time. So I think those are ways of building connection.
So there's something in there that you've said, which kind of, for me, pulls that whole piece together, which is asking the question, when our children tell their children about the grand pause, or whatever we choose to call it in the future, or they choose to call it in the future, how will they be talking about it? What will they remember? And your point about they'll remember how they felt, and then they'll build a narrative on how they felt. They'll justify that at a later stage. So for us to make our parents and families and teachers aware of that, then they then have a chance to help children to feel differently about their situation. And of course, what we know, and it's one of the many great things in the Teaching Excellence training program, is it always starts with self first, doesn't it? And if I'm working with a family or a classroom or a team or whatever, I find one stable person to become a beacon for the rest. And that puts the responsibility back into the adult to create the feelings that you want the children to adopt for the future. How do you recommend that a parent even acknowledges or a technique to help somebody become aware that that's a great responsibility, but actually it's easy to do?
Well, I think the first thing is to be aware of the question. What is, to have that as a mindfulness sort of like reminder to yourself, to have that as your point of reference, to go, when something's happening in the immediacy of the family, little Mary's throwing Cocoa Pops at little Johnny or whatever, whatever's going on in that immediacy of the family, to breathe and say to yourself, what do I want them to take from this situation? Or what do we as a family want to take from this situation or learn from this situation? So because it raises your mind up out of the minutiae of the detail of the Cocoa Pops into a more, what we call in NLP terms, a more meta position, where you can say, okay, so what is happening here and what do I want to take away from this? I always remember a friend, when I did my counselling training, way before I learned any NLP, one of the things that that my counselling training was say about a situation is, it's not about the toast, or it's not about the whatever it is. This isn't what and to ask the question, what is it this we're actually arguing about here? Are we actually arguing about who's doing the washing up, or what is it that behind that? So I think in the same way, on a more positive way, you can think, well, what is it that I want us to take away from this? How can I make sure that they learn something lovely from this? So I think that breathe, school is a good thing to breathe, and take that moment for yourself and move to a bigger picture before you respond. I think also to relax about it. I think this is the big thing. Richard was talking about this the other day in his video he made. Is, we will get through this. It will pass. It will be a relatively short period of time. This stage anyway, and so just let it go. Just let it go. It doesn't matter if there's milk on the floor or Cocoa Pops on the table or whatever. It's all right. It'll pass. And I often think now, we're coming up. It's quite interesting. We're coming up to VE Day. So it was 75 years anniversary on I think it was be Thursday, but we've got the day off. We had got the day off on Friday. And my parents' generation were teenagers and young adults in that period of time, and some of my uncles were younger. They were the same age as the kids that we're talking about now, maybe. And it's really interesting to hear what they took away from from that situation, which went on for 7 years, not 7 months, but 7 years. And for the most part, I'm not talking about people who were fighting here. I'm talking about people who were on the home front, so to speak. The kids had a good time. That awful things must have been happening around them. My parents were in Hull. Hull was the most bombed city in the UK, other than London. They were bombed out, but they didn't talk about those things. They talked about going to collect eggs off from grandmas and playing and the rose bay willow herb growing out on the bomb sites, and all sorts of very positive messages that they brought all the way through their lives. So whatever we do in a way, the children are, for the most part, quite resilient. We can do a lot, as you do, Kate, to build more resilience. But actually, children are quite resilient. They are quite tough, and they will make make a good situation for themselves. And I'm really heartened by that. But that they are doing a lot of really nice things and enjoying themselves, and those are the things that they'll remember. So I think we can relax about it a bit and remember the big question, but don't fret about any of it, really.
I love that. I think that's such an important kind of bubble to just open up a little bit. And there's something in what you're saying that makes me think about what we talk about in NLP as timeline. So long as you've got your eye on the big picture, where we're heading. I used to do that with my kids. If I got right up against them like this, I would think, how do I want my relationship to be with them in the future? And that almost took me straight. It's like a complete, like you say, it jumps you out of that moment in time, because it's not about that big clash in the moment. You have to do something else, but it's almost like your brain takes care of it when you jump to that big jump, that position in the future.
That's right. Absolutely. And as we say, the brain goes where it's sent. So that's a really important thing to remember, that is, whatever you're focusing your attention on, whatever you're thinking about, is where your energy, your physiology, your thoughts, your actions will all line up with that. So make that thought the most useful you can, and let everything else back you up on that. Because as you said, that is exactly what happens. It doesn't fight against it, it goes with it.
And as you were saying earlier, sometimes you just can see somebody's shoulders relaxing when they suddenly realise it's much easier than they were thinking.
Yes, I think so. I mean, when I was talking to this bit, as I was saying before, I was, I'm reassuring these parents that everything will be okay. That all we have to do is wait this out. You could see them starting to go, because I think that's another thing that another message really is, when things, because we're a bit isolated, and although we've got all these sort of connections, there's a lot of fantasizing going on, massive amounts of fantasizing going on. So in terms of I refuse to call it homeschooling, by the way, because we're not homeschooling. We're trying to run a school at home. There's a difference. Homeschooling is a choice that people make. This is just getting through, having some stuff home, some school stuff going on at home. But one of the things that I see in here is people fantasizing about what other people are thinking about them. So we've got, parents, as I said before, fantasizing that the teachers have an expectation that they will do all of this stuff that the teachers are sending home, and that they're being judged like as an Ofsted, being Ofsteded by the teachers. And actually, I don't know if anybody saw it on, I saw it on Facebook, a lovely thing where an Ofsted inspector had graded himself as the school at home with his 2 teenagers, and he created this whole new set of gradings, like absolutely dreadful, awful, and because there he is, and going, I can't do this either. I've got a 12-year-old who doesn't listen to me and a 14-year-old who won't come out of his room, you know. So there's all this fantasy exciting going on and mind reading about what teachers are thinking of them. And then interestingly, I was talking to a group of teachers, and they're teachers in a private school. So there's a huge amount of pressure on them because, you know, their parents are paying for these children to be educated, and they're at home. So they've got, you know, they're trying to produce wonderful you know, lessons online and all of this stuff. And they're saying, well, we haven't got any equipment and we've only got our phones and things to record it with. And when we make a mistake, we have to start all over again. And their fantasy was that the parents were sitting, watching these classes, judging the teacher's performance. And of course, teachers aren't used to being observed by adults other than the odd inspector. Their audience is children, and they're used to communicating with whatever age group they do. So they had all this fantasy about what the parents were thinking of them. And I said to this group, so when you're in class, do you ever make a mistake? And they went, oh, yes. And I went, and what do you do? They say, oh, I've made a mistake. They say, oh, we say we made a mistake and put it right. And I said, so what's the difference between doing that in a class and doing that over the internet, or when you're recording a lesson, or you're teaching a lesson? No different. They're like, oh, well, I suppose not. Because I said, you're not making, you know, a major movie production here. You're not expecting to, you know, be producing something of a Hollywood standard. So there's all this fantasizing going on. And
yeah, I really get that. And there's something in there, isn't there, about this, because it divides our attention. So, you know, if you know, you and I, we both would teach people to give undivided attention, to hold the space for the learner or learners. And in doing that, our bandwidth has to be completely expansive. But if you take up a chunk of your own bandwidth with, what do they think of me? What's, you know, then you've already limited the outcome for the person or people in front of you.
Absolutely. And of course, the minute you have that thought on the inside,
yeah.
You know, another way of looking at this is that inside outside. Where is your attention? You know, if you want to do a really good job, put all your attention on the outside and on the people that you're communicating your message for. The minute you go inside, you will fall over your words, stumble, worry, or whatever. So yeah, I like that bandwidth metaphor, but it's also about where you are. Be inside or outside, but not both.
Yeah.
And
again, it's back to that flow, isn't it? You know, if you're flowing in to flow out with something useful, to, you know, it's like casting I don't know, I'm thinking fishing or something metaphor, you know, that, but yeah, you see, I've gone inside now and I'm like, you know, there's something that I also, I want to pick up on something that you said about, you know, this fear of being judged. And I find that really fascinating, because one thing that's come out of this whole situation for me is suddenly I'm spending all my time looking at myself on the screen thinking, oh, do I really look like that? Listening back going, okay, come on, come on, that's not what it sounded like in the moment. But instead of being critical, it's like, okay, so next time I can use that information to become even better, more focused, more determined, and whatever else I need to do. But I do know of colleagues who've done the same thing and they've been crumpled by what they've seen and heard because it hasn't matched their internal picture. And I wonder if, you know, again, that's part of what some teachers are experiencing, that they are being faced with that feedback and it doesn't match the picture and sound.
That's right, and then, you know, often we're not good at feedback. We're not good at feedback or feed forward. We're not good at constructive, useful feedback. We're not good at processing unhelpful feedback and being able to choose what we're going to pay attention to. And I noticed, you know, talking to teachers, that those that are really doing a great job with their students have all of those loops running. You know, they're, you know, one of the things I said to the teachers and the parents, you know, one of the most important things to remember, and this, I think this is sort of in summary what you're saying, is nobody knows what they're doing. And none of us know what we're doing. Nobody's been here before, so we have no idea. So the best way to approach that is in a spirit of experimentation. And what I see with some teachers who 3-4 weeks ago hadn't a clue, they'd never delivered an online class, they'd never thought about it. They're experimenting, and some of them are doing some amazing stuff. And of course, we've begun the whole idea of, you know, some people will be familiar with the idea of flipping your classroom, which means slightly different things to different people, but essentially, you know, it's handing things back to this, you know, your students, your learners, to do the questing, if you like. And I'm seeing some really exciting stuff going on. So I've got people recording classes and getting them. And one teacher who's a teaching excellence graduate is getting his students to write the course books for next year's students.
Okay.
Because they're at the review and revision point of view. So you could say, well, you've got to revise, which is very dull. But instead, he's created this exciting way of, hey, how would you, you know, well, wouldn't it be great? What book would you like to have had when you first arrived on this course? So write that one, you know. So they've got all these students, you know, they're being creative and trying different things. And as you said, they go like, okay, that didn't work too well. That's all right. Let's do this differently. Or maybe we could, you know, look at this a different way. Or that worked really well. And to be open to those suggestions and ideas. Pardon?
To giggle.
God, yeah, absolutely, yes, and have a bit of fun with it. I mean, look at what's worked really well. Look at who's worked really well. Joe Wicks, you know, okay, I'm gonna run a half-hour PE class in my living room every morning, and a simple thing. And look, practically every kid in the country is doing that, and parents as well, and grandparents, and so, you know, it's the simple things often that will just go, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And I think that's another big message. So, you know, as well as the sort of isolation of fantasy, is to get out there and share the load, share the burden. I was talking to some, you know, one of the things that's happened with a lot of parents is that, and again, I don't think teachers have taken enough notice of this, is when you send something out, it wallops the parent as they read what they've got to teach the kid next back into their experience of school. Now, for some people that's good, but for some people it's not so good. Their feelings about learning that subject or doing that work are not good. So you've got a parent who's walloped into not being in a good place, who's then got to try and overcome that to help their child, teach their child to do it, and they're not skilled as a teacher because they've not had 3 years training. So it's almost a hide to nowhere, and teachers not recognising that that's happening. And I had loads of messages from people going, oh, I just feel so terrible, I can't do this, it's horrible. And I've said, well, don't do that then. Or do you know somebody who loves that subject? So one parent I know dialed up on FaceTime their uncle in Ayrshire to help with a bit of maths that their 9-year-old was doing that they didn't understand. And actually, uncle in Ayrshire really enjoyed that contact, really enjoyed that experience. So if you could run a really nice baking session with a group of kids on Zoom or online or on someone that you're on Skype, and you're giving 2 or 3 other mums and dads or carers 45 minutes to themselves, and then they do the same for you. How easy does that start to get when we start to collaborate in that way? We don't have to, just as I said, I don't like the word lockdown. I don't really like the idea of socially isolating. We're not socially isolating. We're physically distancing. We're not socially distancing. We're physically distancing. And we can socially be closer.
Yeah, that's such an important thing. It reminds me of when my children were small. Every summer holiday, a group of young mums, we would get together and we would take it in turns to lead an activity with the children. So it might be, I don't know, baking or planting something in the garden or creating a certain model or something. But yeah, we take it in turns to lead the activity. And
or even just having a picnic or something when you can get out and about. I mean, because then it gives everybody else a break. Because that's the other thing that came up in a lot of my conversations, is that some parents are feeling quite guilty because they're not 100% enthusiastic of spending 100% of the time with their kids, but their heart sinks. Oh, I really don't want to do building Lego. And they feel guilty that they don't want to be an enthusiastic playmate for their, teacher, parent, playmate, whatever. They're feeling guilty about it. But I'm saying, well, it's not always that exciting. You have a baby, you can only go sort of goo, 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 and make noises at them for so long before it gets a little bit tedious. If you wanted to play with, who wants to play with an 8-year-old is an 8-year-old. It's like, of course you don't want to do those things all the time. You want friends of your own age, which is, what, I would be worried if you was, I worry about these parents who say, oh, my daughter's my best friend. And we go, well, get a friend of your own age. Why would you want an 8-year-old as your best friend? You're a parent. You're not a best friend, you're a parent. And sometimes we all do things that are a bit tedious and they're a bit dull. Anybody who's had a toddler, and you can play tea parties, can't you, for hours. They'll play pouring tea and drinking tea until you're just like mind numb with it. That's what part of it is. It's okay to have your own feelings about it. And so that's why I think sharing these things out so that you get a break. And what I've said to these mums, let them go in front of the computer or let them watch Frozen for the nth time. Take an hour out. Have that time for yourself. Build your resilience. Build what and then the next hour, you can be present for your child and you can play tea parties or build Lego or teach maths or whatever it is that you're doing in that hour with enthusiasm, knowing that a little bit later you can have some more time to yourself. And I think that moving in and out and not expecting to be there 24/7 is important. You have to build space within your space.
As you're talking, I'm also thinking about the parents who discover something about themselves during play. They discover that actually, when they access those childlike parts of themselves, that they can let themselves down, and then they feel disappointed afterwards. It's like, no, the front door is definitely red in that Lego house, and I am right.
Yes. And the competitive streak comes out in the game. Yes, well, I really do want to win this Ludo game.
My kids were traumatized by board games, that now that they're properly grown up, they can just about manage a board game, but it didn't work for a long time. And that's okay, you know, that's the point, isn't it? That's the message, is let's not beat ourselves up. Let's, you know, it's all okay.
That's right. I think absolutely that. And I think that, you know, everything will be okay. It will pass. And, you know, it's the worry and the fretting does more harm than just letting it go. You know, parents are saying, well, how many hours should they spend online? And, you know, well, this isn't the time to even have that conversation, really. Whatever works for your child is what's important. And I think, you know, we've got some children that need massive amounts of structure, and they thrive on that. And so give them the structure. But others really balk against that and want to use this time for more freedom. So let them do that. It just depends. You know, I think the other message that's really important to parents, Kay, is that, you know, you and I are sitting here. We're parents, I'm grandparents. We've, you know, known thousands and thousands of children, and so we can make hopefully some helpful suggestions for people. But it's really important that parents remember that you're the expert in your child, and that nobody knows your child as well as you do. And so making the choices that are right for them is important, and not to generalize over these things, that things will be different for each child. And they might be different within your family. You know, you can get very different children, as you know, within the same family. I mean, I remember working with one family, and the parents were very conscientious, you know, very sort of, you know, lived work, and the father said to me, you know, well, we work hard and then we play hard, but their play was very structured. So they would go on, you know, mountaineering holidays, or, you know, all their holidays had an outcome. And the first child came along and was absolutely slotted perfectly within this family, brilliantly, and they were all happily doing that. And then the next child came along, and it was like the cuckoo in the nest. It was just an entirely different child, and it was really hard for the parents to understand this sort of this received wisdom within the family that that's how you did things. And this one went, no, I don't really do that. And so, you know, you have to be able to be flexible with your different children and value the different things that your children want to do in different ways. And one of them might be very structured, and the other one might not be. So it's, you know, go with the flow.
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask you very specifically, and you use the SOS acronym, which I think is fabulous: strategies, opportunities, and success. If we just jump into the opportunities, it's obviously something that's very important to me, is always looking for the opportunities. What I have seen, this is my personal observation, that this business of silo teaching up until now, you know, now we're going to do history, now we're going to do maths, now we're going to do English, now we're going to do PE, and that at the moment seems to be what a lot of parents are struggling with, because that's not life, is it? And you and I are in the business of building life skills, and it occurred to me, I was watching a kid in a garden near me, or a family, should I say, and I watched them a couple of times recently with huge admiration. The children are outside virtually all day. They clearly go in for a couple of hours of proper teaching or whatever it is that they're doing. even just watching them bouncing on the trampoline, I was thinking about the cross-curricular opportunities of bouncing on a trampoline. You've got maths, you can recite poetry, you can do your vowel sounds, you could sing songs, you could do pitches, you could, you know, lift and lower your pitches, you could turn towards the past, the future, you could run a whole cross-curricular lesson just with trampoline bouncing. And I know you're such an avid gardener and potting a plant and being in the green, you know, the opportunities but we have to retrain people's brains out of where they've been with this. But that's
absolutely. And I think it's quite interesting because I'm a governor of a school, and I work in schools still, training, usually, you know, sort of training a whole school approach to something. And I just don't get this. I still don't get this after all these years. There's quite often in the whole year of the curriculum, in the whole, you know, there will be what they call suspended curriculum weeks. You know, I know half a dozen, maybe no more than half a dozen times a year, that would be, or sometimes they're called theme weeks, and this is where the normal timetable is suspended, and there's a theme. So, you know, for example, it could be this week, say, it could be VE Day, it could be the war, you know, Second World War VE week, because this would be a good week to do it. It ends in a culmination of a bank holiday. It could be, you know, landing on the moon. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. One of my students says, and I quote it in the book, is, you know, the content, the curriculum is the Trojan horse of the learner. And when we pick up a theme, whatever it is, it gives us the opportunity, gives children the opportunity to deep dive into learning. And that's what they do. So whatever, you take a theme, you take something, and there's always the maths, the language skills, the written skills, the research skills, the science, the geography, the history. There's all of those things within any theme you choose. I do not get why we have these 45 minutes. But I never have got why we do this, even though I spent years, like you did, as a teacher, teaching to 45, you know, minute slots. Because there is so much more opportunity, and again, you know, parents, they're not skilled teachers. They don't know about these things, and so the teachers are helpfully sending a timetable home because they want to help the parents, so they send a timetable. I rang my friend the other day and she went, I can't talk now, I'm teaching maths. Oh, so you've got, you know, and it's like, oh, and I found myself going, I wonder what time lunchtime is. Again, you know, what? So where we can take these opportunities of finding something, absolutely, you know, what are you interested in as a parent? Can you get, you know, we were talking before about how boring it is doing what the kids want to do. Well, get kids doing what you want to do. You know, we know loads of people are baking, they're growing things. There's so much science in there, you know. Our friend Julie Olson, I remember saying, one of my standing jokes about Julie is that, you know, as a geography teacher, I said, we were out saying, it must be wonderful to know all about, you know, the different landscapes when we're out. And she said, oh no, but you see, what I really love is soil. And I never thought of soil as being interested, but Julie enthused me about soil, and, you know, there's biology and chemistry and measuring and all sorts of things in any subject you take. So I think this is a really good opportunity to deep dive into learning something and letting all the skill sets, the mastery skills, coalesce around whatever the topic of interest is. And And of course, there's quite a lot of evidence of this. I often refer parents to the Hole in the Wall project, because that's about asking a really good question and giving people the resources to find out for themselves and letting them get on with it. And I think there's a lot of joy to be had in that. And as you said, something as simple as bouncing on the trampoline has got lots of science in. And any experience can be like that. I tell a story in Teaching Excellence about a little girl being taken on to a fun fair, and learning all about velocity, centrifugal force, maximum speed, minimum movement, from going on the rides with her dad. And never forgot it, because deep, maximum excitement and joy and pleasure is glued to all that science. How fantastic.
Yes, and we seem to, I know I'm generalising, and we both are, but we seem to, as a society, have lost sight of that. And I often hear, this business of I have to teach my child, and that seems so ridiculous, because if you just stop and think about what have you learned recently. If I think about what I've learned recently in the last 6 weeks, I have learned how to create an online program. Who knew? I've learned how to navigate Zoom. I've learned how to communicate in a different way with certain members on social media, and the reason I've learned it is because I wanted to. And it's that. So if we ask the parents or any adult, how do you learn, what are the conditions for your learning, and then you can kind of take away that need to teach a child.
And I think that's just a misnomer because of lack of information, because of, again, it's a fantasy about what you think you're doing. I mean, one parent actually asked me, how do they get their child to see them as an authority figure? Well, it's like you get a different hat. Oh, I put my teacher hat on today, I've got my parent hat on, I've got my playmate hat on. You can't be all of those things, and the lovely phrase, we a lot of people will have heard you and I have used before, which is, let's not be a sage on the stage, let's be a guide on the side. And that's all a parent can expect to be. Is, unless you want to go and retrain, and become a teacher, then sure, go and learn a set of skills if you want to, but it's not necessary, and you don't have to. And actually, the other thing that I think people need to remember is it's that idea of formally what is a teacher. A parent is always the primary teacher for a child. You teach them, help them to, they've learned all the most important things before they go to school. They've learned to walk and talk and feed themselves, and all of those things are your responsibility, and you've taught all of that stuff. So you do know how to do it for your child, and it's about keeping on doing what you've always done and not suddenly trying to morph yourself into another person.
So I think something you just said there sparked a question in my mind. You say, yes, we do these things for the child, but I think sometimes we get confused and make it about us. Am I a good enough parent? Am I a good enough teacher? And then we've taken the attention about who it's for, and switched it round and made it about us. And,
oh yes, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of competition in some quarters of parenting quarters as to who's doing it best. It's the same with the SATs. SATs were set up to measure schools and teacher performance, and very quickly they morphed into school gate conversations about who's done best in their SATs test. I wouldn't even be giving those results out, especially under 11, because it's not about a competition. And I think that is, that's the nature of the beast, is that some parents will compete with each other as to how good a parent they are, how, are they to be the best parent, the best teacher, to do the work. And actually that's not a great position. There's only one thing worse than being a completely neglectful parent, and that's being perfect. I know adults who are still trying, to get to be as good as their parents are, because they hold this view of, how spectacularly fantastic their parents are. It's best to just be a little bit imperfect. Bruno Bettelheim wrote a book called The Good Enough Parent. We use that term. Good enough is best. Good enough. Having some flaws is a good thing. Not being perfect is a good thing. Because how does a child learn to accept their own mistakes and flaws and idiosyncrasies if they're measuring themselves against something they perceive as perfection, rather than somebody who accepts themselves with their own flaws? So I think that's another really important thing. But I think there will be a lot of people out there trying to compete with being, having done better, which is why they're trying to stick to the timetables and do all of those things, because they want to do the absolute best and be up there with the, with the other parents. And I think that's a big message. You're going back perhaps to where we started with what's on the radar. I think what I would like parents to take away from this whole experience is to stop being such helicopter parents, to stop being so competitive as parents, to stop thinking that they have to be everything for their child and give them all of everything to be the best. Because actually it's not been very helpful. It hasn't been in terms of the amount of stuff they've got. And I was actually telling a group of parents, I was fantasizing, again, it was my fantasy, about what my mother would have been doing at this time if we'd have been 8 or 9 when COVID-19. My mother would have probably still gone, oh, well, go out, just come back in a couple of hours, for something to eat if you have to. It was, no, I'm having coffee online. no, darling, go play. My parents, our parents didn't have an expectation that they were going to provide every moment of attention and entertainment and resource for their children. That there was an understanding that actually children doing stuff on their own for themselves was a good thing. Some of the time, maybe the pendulum was too far that way, but I certainly think in some cases it's swung too far the other way. And what would be helpful to happen is for a little bit more equilibrium, a little bit more balance between giving the children our time, our resources, our attention, and allowing them to learn and allowing them to be. We don't need to watch them on the trampoline in the garden.
For anybody listening and watching this, is we can't help but notice how we respond to these suggestions that you make. And my first response to what would I have done is what my parents may have done when I was 8 years old, is I instantly remembered, as a family, we would always be making pulleys and dens, and that's what we would have been doing. And so the big message from from my growing up, from my father, very much was, really what's important is that you're able to navigate life as an adult successfully, and that comes to your S in the SOS, and what does that look like? And it reminds me of when in the 80s when I had my children, Obviously, I was about 10 at the time. But
Oh.
the Bible that I used was Penelope Leach's Birth to 5 Years. I don't know if you know it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
one of the questions was, how will you know if you've been a good enough parent? And she answered that. It's an interesting question to ask parents themselves, but her answer to that was, if you like your children when they're adults. And whilst I don't necessarily, well, I don't think that's the right answer, if there is a right answer, it's a good question to ask. But it brings us back full circle to the beginning of the conversation. We need to be looking ahead a little bit, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And again, with a giggle and with a bit of forgiveness for ourselves, because we don't know. I think this is, just as I said before, nobody knows what they're doing. One of the other things that I notice is that people, we don't know what the outcome will be. And people find this really hard to live with. Not knowing, the uncertainty of life is something that I think people are facing and are fearful about. And to find a place to be where you can accept that not knowingness. Actually, it was like that before, but we just didn't let it in. We just pretended that we knew what was going to happen. So we booked a holiday in June, so we were going to go on holiday in June. Well, chances are we probably were, but actually something might have happened and we didn't. So actually none of us know what tomorrow will bring. And living with that uncertainty, living with that is very hard for some people, but I think it's a good thing to work on so that we can start, because it means that we live more in the moment, we live more in the present, we're more present in our own lives and for our children's lives, and not out there or somewhere else. So I think that living, accepting a certain degree of uncertainty. It's quite interesting, isn't it, when we look at the media? It's like as soon as there's a hint about something, then the media. So it's like, well, as soon as we're in lockdown. We're in lockdown. Yes, we've done it. We're in lockdown. The UK has been really very successful in its lockdown. Well, when are we coming out? And how are we coming out? And how's it going to happen? And we don't know. But the media is constantly on it, trying to get the answer, because that's a reflection of us. Well, how is it going? Well, we don't know yet.
Yeah.
That's all right, isn't it?
Absolutely. And do you know what, Kate? I mean, there's a whole other conversation in there about how our brains seek familiarity and the illusion of control and predicting the future and that. But as you rightly point out, it was all an illusion anyway, wasn't it? But we do those things naturally. Kate, we've been talking for over an hour, and which is so easy for us, I know. It's been an absolute delight. What I've taken away from this, I love your acronym, strategies, opportunities for success, strategies and opportunities for success, or however you join those three letters together. You've certainly given us some great strategies and highlighted the opportunities of this big time for us, and always aiming our brains towards success, which of course Teaching Excellence does, and all the excellent work that you do. Where can people find you, Kate?
Well, you can find me on my website, which is www.meta-nlp.co.uk. You can find me on Facebook at Kate Benson, and you can find my book and my co-author, Dr. Richard Bandler, the co-founder of NLP, on Amazon. Teaching Excellence, the definitive guide to NLP.
Super, and it's an excellent book. It is an excellent book.
It's my little plug. And please do feel free to email me at enquiries@meta-nlp.co.uk. I'm delighted to hear from people and love their questions and stories, and endeavour to answer them all myself.
And always inspiring, and that's the purpose of these conversations, is to inspire resilience. And I think you've done a great inspirational conversation, and I thank you so much as always, Kate. And of course, if you didn't quite catch that on playback, then just contact me and I can redirect you to Kate at any time. So super to see you as always, and million thank yous. Hopefully we'll be able to do it again soon. Take care.
Thank you for inviting me, Kate. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.